I remember the way the air shifted in that room, heavy with something unspoken. My sister's smile was too polished, her tone too smooth, as if she had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. "Rachel," she said, nudging those envelopes closer, "it's time you step up. The kids need you more than that part-time cafe gig. And, starting next month, 300 extra for rent. You'll manage." The words landed like chains, locking me in place. 3 years of unpaid labor, school runs, endless laundry, late-night fevers, none of it counted. She wanted more. Always more. That night, a truth hit me hard. I wasn't family anymore. I was disposable. And something inside me broke. I used to believe that hard work and kindness would be enough, that if I poured myself into my dreams and gave selflessly to the people I loved, life would eventually reward me. But dreams are fragile things, and mine shattered long before I was ready. When I graduated college at 22, clutching a degree in graphic design, I pictured myself walking into sleek offices with sunlight bouncing off glass windows, my portfolio under my arm, my future wide open. I saw myself sketching logos, creating book covers, designing campaigns that carried my name in tiny print at the bottom. My professors told me I had talent. My classmates envied my determination. I thought I was unstoppable. Then the debt came crashing down. Student loans, credit cards, rent piling up faster than I could scrape together part-time income. I picked up shifts at a cafe during the day and worked late into the night freelancing online for pennies. But no matter how many hours I put in, the math never added up. At 24, drowning in bills, I finally admitted defeat. I couldn't keep myself afloat. That's when Cheryl, my older sister, offered me a place in her home. She made it sound like a lifeline. "Just come stay with us until you get back on your feet," she said. Her voice was warm, reassuring. She had a house, 4 kids, and a boyfriend who drifted in and out of the picture. "It'll be good for the kids to have their aunt around. You're so good with them." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I still belonged somewhere. So, I packed up my life into 2 suitcases and moved into her spare room. At first, it didn't seem so bad. The kids, Logan, 12, bright-eyed and too old for his years, Mia, 9, sweet and sensitive, twins Caleb and Chloe, 6, chaotic bundles of energy, filled the house with noise and laughter. They clung to me like vines, hungry for attention, for someone to read them bedtime stories and remember their favorite colors. Cheryl was often too tired or too busy, and Blake, her boyfriend, was barely present. The children became mine in every way except legally. But what started as helping out quickly grew into something else. Within weeks, I was the one doing school drop-offs, packing lunches, folding laundry into endless piles, scrubbing floors sticky with spilled juice. Cheryl's compliments, "You're a lifesaver, Rachel," slowly turned into expectations. "You'll be home for dinner, right? The kids need you." I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved up. Just until I figured out my next step. But months blurred into years. I was 25, then 26, working the early shifts at the cafe just to afford groceries for myself, while Cheryl pocketed Blake's sporadic contributions and spent weekends out with friends. When bills arrived, she slid them across the counter toward me. "You're living here rent-free," she reminded me. "It's only fair." Fair. The word cut like a blade. Fair didn't feel like stumbling home after an 8-hour cafe shift to find 4 hungry kids waiting because their mother never cooked dinner. Fair didn't feel like watching Cheryl buy herself a new handbag while I rationed instant noodles. Fair didn't feel like watching Blake waltz in with beer on his breath, joking about how lucky I was to live under their roof. Still, I stayed. Because the kids needed me. Because I told myself family was worth it. Because, in my heart, I thought if I gave enough, one day they'd see my worth. But the truth is, no one noticed. Not really. My parents called once in a while, praising Cheryl for keeping the family together, while I sat silently in the background, invisible. Friends stopped inviting me out after too many. Sorry, I can't. I'm babysitting again. My life shrank down to 4 walls and 4 children who loved me desperately, and a sister who barely said thank you. Nights were the hardest. After the kids were asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop open, eyes burning as I took online classes in graphic design. I refused to let my dream die completely. I'd sketch between loads of laundry, create practice logos while the twins napped, cling to the tiny spark of ambition that still flickered. But it felt like holding a candle in a hurricane. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the dark window and hardly recognize myself. My hair tied back in a messy bun, dark circles etched under my eyes, hands chapped from scrubbing dishes. 27 years old, yet I looked older. Worn out. Used up. And yet, I kept going. Because that's what I did. Because I couldn't stand the thought of walking away from those kids, leaving them to Cheryl's chaos. Because hope is a stubborn thing, even when it's been beaten down. People say storms announce themselves with thunder, with lightning splitting the sky. But mine crept in quietly. It started with Cheryl's smiles that didn't reach her eyes. With Blake's smirks when I came home exhausted. With the slow realization that my love, my sacrifices, weren't just unappreciated, they were being exploited. I didn't know it then, but I was standing at the edge of something dark. The winds were shifting, the sky growing heavy. My storm was coming, and when it hit, it would tear everything apart. The night it all came to a head, the air in Cheryl's dining room felt staged, like a bad play where I was the only one who hadn't read the script. Blake sat at the head of the table, legs spread wide, his hand draped lazily over the back of Cheryl's chair. She smiled at me too sweetly, the same smile that used to disarm teachers when we were kids. Only now it looked sharpened, weaponized. "Rachel," she began, sliding a neat stack of envelopes across the table, "Blake and I have been talking. We think it's time you stop wasting your life at that little cafe. The kids need you here, full-time. And starting next month, rent goes up. 300 more should cover it. Fair's fair, right?" Her words landed like a slap. For 3 years I had carried her household like it was my own. I worked dawn shifts pouring coffee for strangers, then raced home to get her children to school. I stayed up into the dead of night finishing design assignments, my eyes burning until tears blurred the screen. Every paycheck I earned stretched thin, groceries, kids' clothes, school supplies, while she waltzed in late with shopping bags swinging from her wrists. And now, fair meant giving up the one job that kept me tethered to independence, and paying her more for the privilege of being her unpaid nanny. I laughed, but it sounded broken. "You can't be serious." Blake leaned forward, smirking. "Come on, Ratch. You live here rent-free. You eat our food. You use our water and electricity. Don't you think it's time you pull your weight?" Pull my weight. The phrase made bile rise in my throat. Did they not see the lunches I packed, the homework I checked, the nights I sat up holding a feverish child while they were out? Did they not notice that I was the one who kept this house standing while they lived like careless teenagers? Memories rushed in, me racing from cafe to night class, dragging my body home only to find Cheryl's sink piled high with dishes, toys scattered like landmines across the floor. I thought back to every insult disguised as a joke, every time Blake mocked my little art projects, every sigh from Cheryl when I asked for one evening off. Something inside me cracked. "I've been pulling my weight," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "More than my weight. I've been raising your kids while you play house. I've been paying bills, cooking, cleaning, holding everything together. And you want more." Cheryl's smile vanished, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be dramatic. We're just asking you to be practical. You owe us for living here." That was the moment I realized I wasn't her sister anymore. I was her servant. And servants don't get thanked. They get discarded when they stop obeying. I left 2 weeks later, my heart breaking as I packed the few belongings I owned into cardboard boxes. Logan stood in the doorway, his 12-year-old face caught between boyhood and manhood, eyes wide and wet. "Don't go," he whispered. "I have to," I told him, hugging him so tightly he gasped. "But I'll always be here for you. Don't forget that." I thought the worst was over. But betrayal is a snake. It strikes when you think you've already escaped. 2 days after moving into a cramped studio apartment, there was a knock at my door. A police officer stood there, his expression stiff. Cheryl had filed a report, accusing me of theft and vandalism. She claimed I had taken jewelry, cash, even electronics when I left, and that I'd damaged her car out of spite. My stomach dropped. My own sister had turned me into a criminal. The officer searched my apartment, but of course found nothing. Still, the humiliation burned into me, the stares from neighbors, the questions I couldn't answer. I sat alone on the edge of my bed, shaking, realizing Cheryl hadn't just used me. She was willing to destroy me. But fate has a strange way of cutting through lies. Logan, brave beyond his years, stepped forward. He told the truth, that his mother and Blake had planted the lies, that nothing was stolen, that I had left quietly with only my own belongings. His voice carried the weight of a child who had seen too much, and for once, adults listened. The accusations crumbled. Still, the damage was done. Something in me, something naive, hopeful, desperate for approval, died that week. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. A woman hollowed out by betrayal, carved open by the people she trusted most. The grief was sharp, but beneath it stirred something darker. Anger. For years I had bent myself into pieces for Cheryl, given her everything, my time, my money, my dreams, and she had repaid me with cruelty. I had been blind, believing that love could excuse exploitation. But not anymore. As I sat in that tiny apartment, replaying Logan's trembling voice, Cheryl's smug smile, Blake's sneer, I felt the first sparks of something dangerous flicker in my chest. Revenge. It whispered to me like a promise, like justice waiting to be claimed. They thought they could break me, bury me, erase me. But they had underestimated what I could become when pushed too far. That night, alone in the dark, I made myself a vow. I would stop being their servant. I would stop being their victim. I would become their reckoning. I moved into Emily's spare room with 2 suitcases and a heart that felt like a fist. She made me tea and didn't ask the kinds of questions that open fresh wounds. That's what friends do. They sit with you in the quiet until the noise inside your head fades enough for action. For a few days, I let myself be a wreck. I cried until my cheeks were raw. I let the betrayal wash through me until there was nothing left but a cold, clean place where anger could start to grow. Grief makes you soft for a time. Anger makes you dangerous. I felt both, curled up on Emily's couch, scrolling through old messages I'd kept, just in case. At first it was looking for comfort, a screenshot here, a note there that proved I hadn't imagined the way they'd spoken about me. Then something shifted. Those little scraps of proof started to fit together into a map that led straight to the truth I was going to show the world. The first thing I did was cut the cord. No more lending money. No more covering when the washer broke or the kids needed new shoes. I closed my bank app and made a new rule. If the money belonged to me, they would no longer touch it. When Cheryl texted, asking for a little help this month, I typed one sentence and then hit send. I can't. I'm working on myself now. It felt like a small betrayal in their eyes, and that thought made me smile coldly. I knew what desperation did to people. I wanted them desperate. Then I went hunting for evidence. I am a designer. I live in files, organized, labeled, searchable. That habit saved me. I started with every paper I could find. Texts, emails, payment confirmations, the little notes Cheryl left on the fridge asking me to please cover gas this month, signed with a smiley face. I printed bank transfer receipts where my name showed up paying for school supplies, doctor co-pays, Groceries. $42 here, $67 there. Small numbers that added up to the truth of years of unpaid labor. But there was more. Little things that made my skin crawl when I saw them woven together. An email from Cheryl to some government office, carefully worded, requesting extra benefits, mentioning reduced household income, while her Instagram showed brunches and new shoes. A screenshot of a cashier's receipt with Blake's signature on a credit line she'd taken out to help with the family, but which seemed to end up on his own nights out. I saved copies of every urgent text, every voicemail where Cheryl weaponized guilt. You know how the kids need you, Ratch. Don't make us choose. Then I found the thing that made my fingers shake, a PDF someone had mistakenly uploaded to the clinic's shared drive. Blake had been sloppy in moments. Proud boasters often are. The file was a spreadsheet of personal expenses disguised as household necessity, with columns labeled in a way that screamed tax avoidance. It suggested he'd been pushing bills and income around to avoid scrutiny. I made 5 encrypted backups. I told Emily I was done being invisible. I told her the password to the first file and asked her to steal my fury when I couldn't. If evidence was my knife, strategy was the hand that held it. I needed them to move into their own trap. So I rehearsed a face. When Cheryl called to say she'd been hospitalized, complications with her pregnancy, I felt the old reflex, the one that had made me spring to attention for years. The kids would need someone. A tiny, lying part of me wanted to hurry back, to tuck everything under a blanket of kindness and pretend the last weeks never happened. But I'd learned that kindness had a price. This time, I would set the terms. I'll help, I said into the receiver, clean and steady. But on my terms. I keep my apartment. I keep my job. I will be here for 3 months and no longer. I will not pay rent, and I will not handle finances. I'll be present for the kids' care, and that's it. I watched the typing dots on my screen, imagining the color draining from Cheryl's face as she read them. It was a small victory. Let them think they'd persuaded me back. Let them relax. Predators lower their guard when they smell compliance. Back at Cheryl's, I played the part of the exhausted sister perfectly. Quiet, gentle, the woman who had always been too forgiving. I answered the late-night calls, showed up with microwaved dinners, and sat vigil while the nurses checked her for. Meanwhile, Emily sat in my car, a silent lookout, the backup to any bad move. I recorded conversations with my phone, legal where I live if one party records their own experience, and I put a tiny digital recorder in the living room where Cheryl and Blake left their guard down. People forget microphones exist when they feel comfortable. They also forget how loudly they boast in the privacy of their own confidence. I used calm to disarm them, laughed politely at Blake's jokes, complimented Cheryl on the color of the blanket draped over her legs, anything to keep them speaking. These weren't just petty moments, they were the raw material for truth. I listened for phrases, admissions of guilt, offhand remarks about how long she'll keep giving, careless mentions of who paid for what. I wrote down every sentence that smelled like entitlement and saved voice clips that made my throat close up when I replayed them later. While I played the quiet caregiver, I worked behind the scenes. I reached out to a local journalist, someone who'd once written about community fraud. I didn't give him everything. I gave hints, a breadcrumb trail. I wanted interest, not exposure yet. I contacted a legal aid clinic and asked about how to document welfare fraud and tax evasion anonymously. I learned how investigations start, what kind of paperwork would cause a bank to audit, how a state benefits office reacts to inconsistencies. Information is power, and I soaked it up like thirst after drought. I also began telling the right people the right stories. A neighbor who'd once complained about Cheryl's loud parties became useful when I mentioned offhand the day Cheryl had been asking for extra help, even while guests stayed late. A PTA mom who loved gossip called me a week later, visibly shaken, asking for details. Rumors are tinder. You only need one small spark to turn them into flame. Each small move felt surgical. Cut the money first. Let their cash flow panic. Plant the seed with the journalist. Let the possibility of exposure unsettle them. Record their words. Give the world proof they couldn't spin away. Return as the quiet giver. Let them think they have you. The trap was forming, invisible and patient. Finally, the hardest part. Silence. I stopped answering Cheryl's petty text caustic asides, kept my social media sparse, and let her imagination run wild. A desperate person makes mistakes. A desperate household makes noise. I wanted them noisy and exposed. On a cool morning, Emily and I sat surrounded by files, printouts, and audio clips. She poured us both coffee and slid me the recorder back across the table. "You're really doing this," she said, not as a question but as a benediction. I tapped the speaker with my nail. The recorded voice of Cheryl laughing came back at me from the speaker like acid. I closed my eyes and made the quietest vow I've ever made. I will not be invisible again. The seeds were planted. Now I would wait for them to water themselves. The first strike had to be quiet. Surgical. I drafted an anonymous packet late one night, my hand steady as if guided by someone else's will. Inside, copies of Cheryl's emails to the benefits office, falsified reports about reduced income, bank statements showing deposits that contradicted every plea of poverty. I slid in screenshots of her Instagram, too, smiling with champagne glasses and boutique bags while she swore to the state she couldn't afford shoes for her kids. I mailed it certified, no return address, and when the envelope slipped through the slot, I knew a fuse had been lit. Then I waited. Within 2 weeks, I saw the first sign. A polite but firm letter arrived at Cheryl's house, stamped with the emblem of the state's welfare fraud division. She didn't know I'd intercepted her mail before she could. I sat in my car, reading the words that promised a preliminary review of your case. I almost laughed. The trap was tightening, and she didn't even feel it yet. The second strike needed spectacle. I wanted everyone to see her for who she really was. So I chose her baby shower. The grand performance of maternal sainthood. She had rented a hall, invited half the town, bragged for weeks about the decorations, the cake, the photographer. That morning, I sent an email to the local paper. Attached, a concise file, carefully curated. The welfare documents, the receipts with my name on them, and one line at the top. While she asks strangers for gifts, here's who has really paid for her children's lives these last 3 years. I hit send. By 7 o'clock, the party was in full swing. I walked in quietly, holding a wrapped box like everyone else. Pink and gold balloons floated overhead. Cheryl beamed from her throne of pillows, soaking in the applause. She had no idea that the phone in her pocket was already buzzing with calls from a reporter desperate for comment. It happened fast. Cameras first. 2 reporters slipping through the door like hunters smelling blood. A hush fell as the flashbulbs popped, as questions cut the music in half. Cheryl Dunn, how do you respond to allegations of benefit fraud? Did your sister bankroll this party? The room froze. Every set of eyes swung toward me, and I let the silence speak before I moved. I reached into my bag and pulled out a binder. It landed on the gift table with a thud that made the cake tremble. 3 years, I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected. Every doctor's bill, every grocery run, every school supply, mine. She never paid me. She never thanked me. She called me family while she signed me into slavery. I opened the binder. Page after page of receipts, transfers, schedules in my handwriting. Gas money, prescriptions, backpacks. Proof, undeniable. Mothers at the back clutched their pearls. A cousin muttered, "I knew it." And then the twist came, like a knife sliding out of nowhere. Cheryl's fiancé, Aaron, stood frozen near the cake table. His face was pale, phone in hand, eyes locked on a screen. Someone whispered, "What's wrong?" He turned the phone around, and suddenly, everyone could see. It was a string of messages. Cheryl, late at night, writing things no fiancé should. And not to a stranger. No. The name at the top made everyone gasp. Blake. Her so-called best friend. My old tormentor. The man who had sneered at me in my own kitchen. Aaron dropped the phone like it burned him. You've been cheating on me, he said, voice cracking in front of 50 guests. Cheryl's hands flew to her face. Blake, standing across the room, swore under his breath and stormed out the back door. Aaron followed, but not to chase, only to leave. By the time the door slammed, Cheryl was already collapsing under the weight of stairs. It was chaos. Balloons popped under feet. Voices rose, sharp with judgment. The women who had once praised Cheryl now turned away, whispering about how they'd been duped. Friends she'd leaned on slipped their invitations back into their purses as if contact itself might stain them. And me. I didn't need to scream. I just watched her drown. But it wasn't finished. Oh no. Because while her personal life imploded in the banquet hall, Blake's reckoning was waiting in the cold light of bureaucracy. The same night, the IRS received a mirrored file of his expense spreadsheet. I'd sent it under another anonymous email, flagged with keywords that screamed fraud. He thought he was clever, slipping nightclub tabs under home maintenance, disguising cash gigs as loan repayments. But the IRS doesn't laugh at jokes. And when they came knocking, I knew they'd knock hard. Within a month, Blake was under investigation. His accounts frozen, his clients whispering, his name dragged into court documents. Cheryl, meanwhile, received her second letter from the welfare division, this one less polite, demanding an in-person hearing. The community's verdict came faster than the laws. Invitations stopped. The PTA rescinded hers. The neighbors who once waved at her door now crossed the street. Overnight, the queen of appearances became a pariah. I sat in Emily's kitchen, sipping tea as the news broadcast the latest, local woman under investigation for fraud. They blurred her face, but everyone knew. The anchor's voice was smooth, but my heart pounded with a satisfaction that no sugar could sweeten. Every twist had landed. Every lie was stripped bare. And I hadn't raised a hand in anger. I'd only shown them the truth they were desperate to hide. But the best part, I wasn't done yet. If humiliation were a storm, then Cheryl and Blake were trying desperately to stand in the wreckage, smoothing their hair and pretending the rain hadn't drenched them. After the baby shower disaster, after the reporters, after Aaron's walkout, they should have disappeared quietly. But they didn't know how. Pride wouldn't let them. Instead, they announced a gala. A charity fundraiser, the invitation read, dripping with sanctimony, to support underprivileged children in our community. The irony nearly choked me. These were the same people who had leached every ounce of my youth, who laughed as they turned me into their unpaid nanny, their maid, their ATM. Now they wanted to wear halos in front of the town? No. This was the final stage. I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to help them destroy themselves. The night of the gala, the venue glittered like a palace. Chandeliers, champagne, a string quartet playing near the doors. I arrived late, dressed simply, not in sequins but in steel. My pulse was steady, my hands calm. Every step felt rehearsed, as if my whole life had been leading to this moment. Inside, Cheryl floated through the crowd in a fitted gown, her smile strained but intact. Blake stood beside her, jaw tight, whispering assurances between handshakes. I could see the desperation in their movements. Too many nods, too many fake laughs. They thought they could buy back respect with hors d'oeuvres and sympathy speeches. The program began. Cheryl took the stage first, her voice quivering with manufactured sincerity. "We know," she said, pausing delicately, "that there have been hurtful rumors, but tonight isn't about gossip. Tonight is about the children, about giving back." Applause followed, polite but thin. The crowd wanted to believe her. They always did. But belief is fragile. It just needs the right truth to shatter. When the lights dimmed for the slideshow, the heartfelt montage of smiling children and charity logos, I slipped to the back. A friend in tech, one of Emily's cousins, had loaded my file onto the system earlier that afternoon. All it took was one flash drive and a 2-minute window. The screen flickered. The music faltered. And then it began. Not smiling children. Not charity slogans. But Cheryl and Blake. Their faces filled the 20-foot screen, grainy at first, then clear as day. They were on Cheryl's back porch, wine glasses in hand, laughing under the summer sun. "She's so desperate," Blake's voice rang out, smug and sharp. "It's pathetic. Who else would babysit 4 kids for free?" Cheryl smirked, swirling her drink. "I told her she could move in, and she actually believed it was for her own good. Can you imagine? 3 years and she still hasn't caught on." Laughter. Cruel, ugly laughter. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Chairs creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. Then Blake again. "We'll keep bleeding her until she breaks. Rent, babysitting, whatever. She won't leave. She's too soft. She needs us." The screen froze on Cheryl's face mid-laugh, cruel and radiant in its malice. Silence. Crushing, suffocating silence. Then, as if a dam burst, the whispers began. "Oh my God! Is this real? They used her, her own sister?" The donors near the front row pushed back their chairs. One man, a local business owner whose name had been splashed across the gala program, tore off his donation badge and threw it on the table. "This is disgusting," he spat, loud enough for everyone to hear. One by one, sponsors stood up. A woman clutched her check back from the collection box. Another stormed toward the exit, heels clicking like gunshots. Cheryl's face had gone ghost white. She stumbled forward, reaching for the microphone. This is taken out of context," she stammered. It's not what it looks like." But the crowd wasn't listening. Voices rose, sharp, accusatory. Friends who once toasted her now jeered. Neighbors who'd admired her now shook their heads in disgust. The entire facade she had spent years constructing cracked in seconds, shattered under the weight of her own words. Blake tried to grab the mic, his voice hard. "This is slander. Whoever did this." That was my cue. I stepped out from the shadows, walking slowly toward the stage. The spotlight followed instinctively, catching me in its beam. Gasps echoed again, this time at the sight of me. Rachel, the sister they'd trampled, the ghost they thought they'd buried. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Now," I said, each word cutting like glass, "the world knows who you really are." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Cheryl's lips trembled. Blake's fists clenched. And then the eruption. Applause, not for them, but against them. Cheering, jeering, a storm of outrage directed at the golden couple of lies. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Within hours, the clips would spread online, and there would be no burying them. Cheryl collapsed onto a chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Blake stormed off stage, pushing past guests who no longer parted for him but blocked his way with cold stares. I stood still, calm in the chaos, watching as everything they had stolen, every mask they had worn, crumbled to dust in front of hundreds of witnesses. It wasn't revenge in the shadows anymore. It was justice in the light. And it was mine. My story wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back the power I had been taught to surrender. 4 years, I let people who shared my blood dictate my worth, draining my time, my money, and my spirit. They believed loyalty made me weak, that my silence would last forever. But silence can become a weapon too, when you finally choose to break it. Justice, for me, wasn't about destroying Cheryl and Blake. It was about exposing the truth, refusing to let their lies define me, and showing the world that I was more than the role they forced on me. What I gained wasn't just freedom, it was clarity. I learned that family is not about who you're related to. Family is the circle of people who respect you, uplift you, and never take your love for granted. So, if you've ever been stuck in a toxic cycle, hear me, you have the right to say no, the right to walk away, and the right to create a life that finally belongs to you. Now I ask you, did I go too far by exposing them in front of everyone? Or was it the only way to end the cycle for good? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more powerful revenge stories where justice hits hard, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell.